an outline that we're going to go over. Quick disclosure, I own Bitcoin. I do not own any other cryptocurrencies. I believe that Daniel, Eve, and Aaron own EOS. Is it pronounced EOS? EOS? How do you pronounce it?
EOS.
EOS. You guys own EOS. Do you own any other cryptocurrencies? We might talk about Bitcoin, Ethereum, DOT, XRP, etc.
I own some Bitcoin.
Okay.
Yeah, I end up holding quite a few different coins as well.
Okay. Likewise, same here. Just assume that I have crypto.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So let's see how many people we got. Oh, we've got a good room already. So why don't we get started? So my name is Warren Redlich. For those who don't know me, I am on Twitter and YouTube. I have a YouTube channel where I mostly talk about Elon Musk's companies and other tech-related topics. I have talked about blockchain a little bit. Particularly, I did a video not that long ago about XRP, Ripple, and the SEC lawsuit. I'm an attorney as well, so I take an interest when there's legal issues involved. If you look at the top of the room, you'll see Libertarian Panels US with a little greenhouse. If you click on the greenhouse, you can follow this group. This is the group I created because I like rooms that have panels rather than free-for-all discussions. So you have a few people and you have a focused conversation. And the way the rooms, I usually structure the rooms is we have a focused conversation. When we're finished with what we're trying to do, we invite people up for one-at-a-time questions, send them back to the audience when we're done with that, and then at the end, we open it up for a free-for-all social conversation. And it's generally, this is about libertarian topics, and I think cryptocurrencies and blockchain are right in that vein. It's a very popular topic among libertarians. So let me do some introductions first. So I introduced myself. And as a libertarian, I was the libertarian candidate for governor of New York in 2010. And as an investor, people consider me one of the biggest Tesla bulls. And I do own Bitcoin. Not that much. I'd like to joke that I made about $50,000 on Bitcoin by accident. So, Daniel, could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Daniel Larimer. I'm the creator and architect of BitShares and Steemit and then EOS. I've been in the cryptocurrency space since the days of Satoshi, and my mission is to create free market solutions for securing life, liberty, property, and justice for all. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to use cryptocurrencies to free people and to give them the tools necessary to be independent from all the control systems that governments have put out there around finances and the like. So that's what I'm doing in the space.
Great. And before I ask Yves to introduce himself, I just want to say I had this idea for doing a room talking about next generation cryptocurrencies. Some people had contacted me about other cryptocurrencies, and I tweeted about this idea, and somebody that I follow and follows me on Twitter suggested I contact Daniel, Eve, and Aaron and help set this up. Daniel, Eve, and Aaron, I believe, are all involved with EOS. EOS is what I would call a top 20 market cap cryptocurrency with a current valuation, as I checked today, of over $7 billion. So credit to you guys for creating something so important and so valuable. Eve, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Warren. My name is Yves La Rose. I got involved with cryptocurrencies early in 2010 while I was living in Japan. And essentially, I got involved with EOS in the very early days of EOS. I am a co-founder and I guess CEO of a block producer on EOS, currently ranked number 2, fluctuate in ranking. I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit of the protocol and different protocols of blockchain in general. I started building computers when I was 6 years old, and that's really where I come into this. I kind of fell in love with decentralization and how the role of machines mixed with humans could play roles in decentralization and decentralized future. And that really led me to Dan's vision and to Dan's protocols, and that's why I'm here today.
Sorry, did I not say that? Aaron, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us about your history in relation to EOS and cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely. My name is Aaron Cox. I've been a software developer since the 90s and kind of grew up through the internet, the boom of the internet back in the day, and discovered blockchains and cryptocurrencies probably 2011 or so, but didn't get seriously involved until 2016 when I jumped onto Steem and started exploring what this new industry had to offer. I have followed many crypto projects, and most of my professional development time over the last couple of years has gone into the EOS.io ecosystem. I'm co-founder of Greymass, which is another block producer on the EOS network, and we have specialized ourselves into user experience and kind of protocols and other things that the average person is going to need to be able to use these systems.
Cool, and I brought Mark up on the stage. Mark is the one who brought me to the three other gentlemen on the stage. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you not necessarily to speak so much, but to participate as a moderator. Please make sure you mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got familiar with EOS?
Yeah, sure. See, I guess holding the microphone down. I'm not familiar with. Okay, you can hear me now, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I got involved after basically looking at Bitcoin and enjoying that for a few years and setting it aside. And then I saw the smart contract idea with Ethereum and enjoyed that for about a year until I had issues with the scaling that everybody knows about. And then I was introduced to Dan Larimer and listened to a handful of solutions. And I've enjoyed EOS since then, in that it's a delegated proof of stake, scalable approach. So it really sits well with me. And as at trade, I'm an engineer. I'm a test engineer for the Navy, U.S. Navy, for hardware, software, and network test engineer. So yeah, I'm a user and a tester for the community, really, for the EOS community. And that's about sums it up. I'd like to step down from the stage after this because am recording this also. We'll see how that works out. I think we might have a few people recording this.
That's
If
fine.
that's
I'll
all
do
right.
that. So, just a quick reset because there's more people that came in the room. We're going to talk about next generation cryptocurrencies. Daniel, Yves, and Aaron have introduced themselves. They're involved with their creators or involved with EOS, which is a top 20 market cap cryptocurrency worth over $7 billion. I had this idea for a conversation about what I call next generation cryptocurrencies. We'll find out whether that's a correct way of describing what's coming. So, Daniel, let me start with you. I think you're the big player here, and my interest, I became aware of Bitcoin fairly early. You mentioned, I think, dating back to Satoshi. I remember Phil Zimmerman and Pretty Good Privacy. Do any of the three of you remember Phil Zimmerman and Pretty Good Privacy, PGP?
I've used it a time or two.
Now that's for those who don't know. That's sort of like early computer cryptography. You could encrypt a file, and with using public key private key encryption, which, as I understand it, is sort of public key private key encryption is sort of underlies all blockchain technology. Am I close to correct, Daniel?
Yeah, that early technology was, I guess, suffered from the problem being difficult to use, and the keys were big, and the computers were slow back then. So it's very different today. I think the elliptic curve cryptography and cryptocurrency really makes it possible to do things that just weren't practical with the PGP system.
Right. No, I mean PGP was just this quirky thing that geeks use. But so let me go into my outline. That just popped in my head when you mentioned going back to Satoshi, because I go back to Phil Zimmerman. But what Bitcoin is this big thing now that I believe it went over $63,000 today. What Bitcoin has sort of sparked this movement. What did Bitcoin get right? Before we get into what's not right with it or what can be done better, what did they get right?
Well, I discovered Bitcoin because I was attempting to create a currency that the governments couldn't confiscate the asset that was backing it, because that was always a centralized point of control for like e-gold and systems like that. So Bitcoin, by having value without having anything tangible and being limited in supply by the consensus of the users, is an incredibly powerful technology. It's actually an incredibly powerful idea. The idea that value is derived from agreement, and if we can all agree on the rules, and the rules can be enforced by code, then it's really easy to have consensus and to create something like currency. So I think that's the single biggest thing Bitcoin got right, was removing the tangible assets that can be seized by governments from the role of money.
Let me just ask Yves, do you have anything to add? Is there anything that you noticed about Bitcoin that was special that made it, what it is today?
Well, I think for me, as I said, I started really early on in Bitcoin, and what attracted me to it was kind of the movement. It was the idea. So, kind of echoing what Dan said, the idea that you could transact value, which was subjective, but that you could transact value with people without knowing who they were in a trustless fashion. And the idea being so big that it created a vision and essentially created a movement. And that movement within the cryptocurrency space is still to this day essentially the largest valued movement that we have, and everything stems off of that. And by having Bitcoin as kind of the central point where people come in and out of the ecosystem, over time it gathers more and more value by simply just existing, by just being. And I think that that's what it particularly still gets right. Outside of all the technical components, it's still the initial, in a way, movement or vision still exists very deeply at the core of what Bitcoin is today.
Great. So the next question I have, where I figure we were going to move through the first part of my outline quick. The next question I have is, I see Ethereum as sort of like an improvement in some ways on Bitcoin, or maybe that's not the right term, but it did some things or added some features. So I don't know if Aaron wants to. Aaron's been quiet so far. I wonder if Aaron wants to answer this. How did Ethereum improve on Bitcoin?
I think it was a matter of features. Ethereum introduced the idea that you could do more than just transfer value, which was what Bitcoin introduced. Bitcoin offered a few different ways to transmit data that wasn't, monetary value, but Ethereum really stepped that up and made it so that it was programmable, in a sense, that you could transfer value and then have it do something special based on whatever you wanted it to do. So it introduced this new concept of programmability.
Great. Anything else? Anything you would add to that, Daniel, about what makes Ethereum special?
Yeah, Ethereum generalized the consensus process. So by being programmable, you can build consensus around things that aren't even money. You can have multiple tokens and the like. And Ethereum did take a step forward in improving the performance over Bitcoin. So that was another thing that Ethereum added to the mix.
Okay, and that takes me to the big topic, the thing I really wanted to talk about, which I think you guys are at the forefront of this. To me, I just really quickly, I've been into Bitcoin. I'm interested in Ethereum, but I never bought it. And people have been contacting me about other cryptocurrencies. I remember hearing about Ripple first, or XRP. People have been talking to me about Cardano. Mark introduced me to you guys in EOS. And I see these all as sort of next generation cryptocurrency blockchain ideas. So without specifically talking about EOS yet, because we're going to get to that quickly, what do you see as things that next generation blockchains, if that's the right term, can add to what Bitcoin and Ethereum have already done? What can they bring to it?
Well, the biggest thing that new chains can add, or I guess, increase efficiency and performance, and usability. Now, the early chains like Bitcoin and Ethereum are very, very technical in nature. We were still figuring out the technology when they were built, but now new chains can be more usable, and some of the things that make a cryptocurrency usable are things like performance, where if you want to use a currency in a marketplace, then you want to be able to transact like a credit card, right? 1 or 2 seconds to confirm your transaction, not 15 seconds or minutes, so to speak. So, and to be able to use the blockchain for more things than just money is what these new chains can bring to the table. Now, you mentioned some of these things as next generation blockchains, but in reality, if you look at something like Cardano, it doesn't even have smart contracts yet. There's a giant roadmap, right? And it's anticipated that someday, but some of these chains are just aspirational, and everyone can aspire to be everything. So it's probably helpful to focus on, what are these chains capable of today versus the promises they're making for tomorrow.
Right. So as I understand it, Bitcoin was basically just a currency and or store of value. And your point about transaction speed, does the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, how often does it update?
So the Bitcoin blockchain updates on average every 10 minutes, but sometimes it can take an hour to get a single block. And something like Ethereum is every 15 seconds you get a block. And both of these chains take, tens of minutes in order to reach finality. They don't even reach finality. Where finality means, there's a group of people that agree, and it's never going to go back on that agreement. There's just probabilistic finality. So that's how those chains work. Next generation blockchains tend to be more deterministic in that there is an absolute point of finality, where no matter what, the chain is not going to reorganize. And when a chain reorganizes, that basically means that what people thought was happening isn't what's happening, and everyone's going to go in a different direction with a different set of transactions included in a different order, which could have material impact on people. So a lot of these next generation chains are trying to reduce that finality time and give people greater predictability, which is critical for inter-blockchain communication as these things get integrated together. So I think those are all elements of these next generation chains.
I would just like to say that I love the term probabilistic finality. That is fantastic. So, you mentioned, I think one of the concepts there's this concept of smart contracts that Ethereum added, and some next generation blockchains may also offer smart contracts. For those who aren't familiar with that concept, what is a smart contract?
A smart contract is a algorithm that's interpreting the data that people are broadcasting and determining the state. Yeah, that's very broad, very generic, but in effect, if everyone can agree on the inputs being the signed messages that people are broadcasting out in the world, and if everyone can agree on the order in which they should be sequenced, and everyone can agree on the algorithm, the smart contract, used to interpret those transactions, then you can agree on state. That state could be who owns something, who won the auction, who gets this non-fungible token, reputation scores, whatever the state might be. The smart contract is the code, and it's a special type of code in that it's completely deterministic. All given the same inputs, it always produces the same outputs, and that's the magic of consensus. Is if you have a consensus algorithm like Bitcoin's proof of work or delegated proof of stake, and you can get agreement on the order of things, then you can use any deterministic code to reach agreement on the outcome of things.
So let me ask this question, and I don't know if Dan wants to answer this or the other two want to answer this. Can you give an example of a real world situation where a regular person might benefit from a smart contract based on a blockchain cryptocurrency situation rather than a paper contract or a oral contract?
I'd love to tackle this one. I think what we think of as contracts today are as promises to the other people going to do something, and those promises are basically backed by nothing and sometimes contradictory. It's not even possible to fulfill all the promises. But a smart contract is a set of rules on property rights, and it's a way of expressing under what conditions what property belongs to whom. And there's no promises involved anywhere when it comes to smart contracts. So you could establish a loan to someone that says if a payment is not made by this date, title to the car is automatically transferred to the lender. And that could be expressed as a smart contract. Instead of a loan being a promise to pay, where if you don't pay, then I'm going to sue you and try to get the government to take your car and sell it and repay me. So smart contracts really provide an entirely new way to organize society. And in my opinion, and I express this at length in my book, More Equal Animals, the only contracts that we should actually have should be smart contracts. They should be expressed as smart contracts. And we should never, as a society, particularly a libertarian society, uh, attempt to view contracts as promises or to make promises enforceable at law, um, because that creates a lot of other moral hazards, and I'd love to get into that topic later. But I really do think that smart contracts should be the only contracts that we deal with in society, and everything else is just promises and reputation.
Okay, and I will just add to that really quickly that as a lawyer, I see contracts and how they're enforced or not enforced, and it's not really regular contracts, not smart contracts, and it's not really a great system. It works some of the time really well, but some of the time it doesn't work so well, and I think the promise of smart contracts is very interesting. I think the practical side of it may be difficult, but the practical side of regular contracts is difficult anyway. So let me move on then. Are there any other beyond? So we've talked about transaction speed. We've talked, I think there's also transaction volume as an issue with next generation blockchains, right? They're able to handle higher volumes of transactions. Could you comment on that a little bit, maybe, Yves?
Yeah, sure. So I think, like Dan mentioned, and like you mentioned, Warren, in terms of scalability, one of the things that is advantageous, let's say, or that comes inherent to these next generation blockchains is that scalability feature. It's the inherent capability to be able to process more transactions, to be able to read more data and write more data, which obviously centralized solutions have been able to do for a very long time, but this is in a decentralized fashion, and it's immutable data. And what we see with for example, in EOS, the throughput capability is thousands of times magnitude greater than, let's say, blockchain 1.0 Bitcoin or blockchain 2.0 Ethereum. And so you're actually able to have real world use cases. And that use case can be something as simple as a supply chain, where you need to push a particular transaction or a particular data point to the blockchain every, I don't know, every second or every minute. In legacy systems, legacy blockchain systems, either you're not capable of doing that, or if the system is capable of handling that type of throughput, it's extremely expensive to be able to do. Whereas in new, let's say, blockchains or blockchain 3.0s, the marginal cost to be able to do so is greatly reduced. And so what you have is now an opportunity for businesses to be able to integrate a part of their services onto the blockchain, which increases trust with the customer base. It increases, I guess, the accountability for the customer base for anybody within the system as well, in order to be able to essentially have everything open, transparent, but also immutable in a way that nobody can change that consensus. Nobody can come back and dispute that whatever event didn't occur, or that data point was not pushed. And I think that that's one of the things that new blockchains do extremely well, is that capability of actually having real world use cases, being able to be leveraged on the blockchain, and then having those inherent blockchain value add points to now your business, but at a lower, much lower marginal cost than was possible, let's say, 10 years ago.
Okay, so I want to ask about something we talked about in the process of this was like user friendliness, or the user experience of a particular currency or blockchain. So I don't think any of them have ever been easy for the ordinary person. I think Bitcoin, Cash App, and maybe a couple other apps have now made it relatively easy to buy Bitcoin. I don't know if there's any other cryptocurrency yet that's easy for outsiders to start getting into. And I myself have thought about buying Cardano, Polka Dot, EOS, XRP, Dogecoin, and I'm not sure how I would want to buy them if I decided to go ahead and buy them. How does somebody get started from outside in any cryptocurrency, and how do next generation cryptocurrencies potentially make that process easier?
Well, this is why I created Steem. I realized that trying to get people to buy their way into a system like BitShares was challenging. It's a much harder sales pitch. And there's parts of the world where people don't have money. So I asked myself, how do you get into a cryptocurrency if you don't have money? The answer was, well, people can contribute their time, and if they can write content and produce content, and then the other people that already are in the community vote, then they can earn their way into tokens. And that was incredibly successful. And Steemit was the first blockchain that was so easy to use that people didn't even realize they were on a blockchain. The transactions were instant, there were no transaction fees, and so forth. And so you had grandparents and stuff getting on blockchain because of the ease of use that Steemit brought to the equation. And all EOS did was take the lessons learned from Steemit and generalize it to make it programmable smart contracts. And so that is how I think it makes the blockchain easier.
Let me just pause you for a second. I've heard of Steemit before. I don't know that much about it. I've heard of things like Mechanical Turk. There are ways you can work and get paid on the internet for things, like on a task basis. Is Steemit like that? How does Steemit work? I'm not familiar with that.
Steemit works kind of like Twitter with long form content. People vote on things, and based on the votes, you earn tokens. You sign up, you post, and then you can transfer things all through your web browser.
It seems to me like something like Mechanical Turk, if that's the right term, or Etsy. There's all kinds of things where people can do things online where they're providing work to someone. Like I make videos, and sometimes I've paid people to do like editing for me or send me clips of something or do some animations for me, and I typically paid them through some sort of payment scheme that didn't involve cryptocurrency. It seems like it would make a lot more sense to do that with crypto.
The difference with Steemit is the token issuance. Like instead of people mining Bitcoin with their computers, you would mine Steem with your contributions and people voting for it. And that changes the equation because normal transactions, you have a buyer and a seller, right? Mechanical Turk, there's somebody out there who wants to pay someone else to do something. So that's a double-sided market. With Steemit, the network's already said we're going to pay this much money to whoever produces content, and then it's just a competition to get votes for that content. And that was a way to make onboarding people into crypto super easy, and it was successful at bringing people out of poverty in Africa. And there was this one person involved that they barely had enough money to keep their cell phone charged, but because of Steemit, they were able to post, earn money, and get a middle-class lifestyle just talking about what's going on in Africa. And that's the easiest possible onboarding, and it doesn't require the double-sided market of connecting buyers and sellers of services.
How did that person in Africa convert their Steem into a usable currency for paying their rent or whatever it is that they did? Were they just paying with Steem, or did they convert Steem to local currency? How did that work?
Usually they would convert it through a cryptocurrency exchange, which means they would have to get an account on the exchange and so forth. But I found that if you give people the cryptocurrency first and then they go to the exchange in order to get off, that's an easier way to get them through the exchange rather than to say, hey, sign up for the exchange, transfer your dollars, and then buy in. So it's sort of like you give somebody motive by giving them the currency first, and now they get plugged into the network and then they can buy and sell.
Yeah, I guess my dream is we get to a world where you're able to do transactions, directly in cryptocurrency, and you don't have to go out to some real world currency to get there. But let me move on to my next subtopic here, which is there are these series of blockchains or cryptocurrencies that purport to be next generation blockchains, cryptocurrencies, and like some of the best known. Like one of the best known, I made a video about XRP and Ripple, and the reason I made my video was not because I'm interested in that particular currency, although I was slightly interested, but because the Securities and Exchange Commission sued Ripple, and this had an impact on XRP. So one of my questions basically is, it seems like XRP is still like number 4 in market cap of cryptocurrencies. Does anybody have an opinion of how it's managed to hold on its value despite this attack from the Securities and Exchange Commission?
I generally don't understand how anything in crypto is valued when I look at some of the tokens in the top 10. It's clearly not based on technology. It seems to be valued entirely on which billionaires are supporting which tokens. And it's not, you can't predict value solely based on technology.
Okay, so when we get into next generation blockchains, I guess the one other cryptocurrency that draws my attention because of Elon Musk is Dogecoin, which my impression is Dogecoin is a joke that somehow keeps growing in value. And Elon has even said, if X, Y, and Z happened, then I would support Dogecoin. Is Dogecoin more than a joke?
Well, Dogecoin is just like any other currency. It's a community of users that are using it. And the value is derived by the people that want to transact in it and celebrity, right? Elon attracts a crowd, which creates a lot of celebrity value for the token. Dogecoin is really just a clone of Bitcoin with a few parameters tweaked. So there's nothing technologically special about Dogecoin and the thousands of other clones of Bitcoins that are completely worthless, other than people. So it's each token out there is largely, it's got utility value and it's got currency value, and currency value is driven by the community. Utility value is driven by the technology. And so just like gold and silver, there's a utility value and a monetary value. And the monetary value largely drives the value of gold. Likewise, I think the monetary value is largely driving the value of most cryptocurrencies, rather than looking at just the utility value.
Okay, just so I can, something you said triggered something in me. One of the things when I try to explain, usually it's about Bitcoin, when I try to explain the value of a cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin in this case, there's a use case that most Americans are not aware of, but foreigners might be, which is you came from Honduras and you're working at some difficult job in the United States and you've amassed some money and you want to send money back to your family in Honduras. I'm using Honduras just out for the heck of it. You came from some other country, you want to send money back to your home country. This is something called remittances. And the process of sending money back to your home country used to be difficult. It used to be expensive. It used to take time. And Bitcoin came along and it became possible for people to convert their cash into Bitcoin and then send it to their home country. And it was effectively instant, like maybe it was 15 minutes or a half an hour, but compared to the old way, it was effectively instant. And the transaction cost was much, much lower than whether it was Western Union or whatever. So that's an example for people who aren't familiar with it of how cryptocurrencies can be tremendously useful in the real world for people.
Can I address something you said there? Because that was the original vision of Bitcoin, but the transaction fees that we see on Bitcoin today mean that the smallest transaction that you can make without an insane fee is already like $1,000. Bitcoin is now less divisible than gold. If you had gold coins and you're trying to transact in gold coins, Bitcoin is less divisible, which means that the direction of where Bitcoin's going, or where these older generations, less scalable blockchain currencies are going, is more in the same path as where gold and silver go. They're going to be largely stored in financial institutions, and then maybe used to settle between these financial institutions, and then most transactions are going to flow through these institutions. And if these institutions don't change, then at the end of the day, something like Bitcoin can't be used for remittances by these people that are struggling and just trying to send $100 back to their family, because they're not going to deal with Bitcoin directly. They have to go through a third party to achieve it. And that's where newer, more scalable blockchains like EOS can then become a better currency to achieve the original vision of Satoshi's digital cash.
Right, and actually, when I was telling people this explanation, I was really, that's back when Bitcoin was like $500 instead of $63,000. Yves, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add, I guess, 2 points to what you talked about. So there's the international remittance portion, which, as Dan explained, is not scalable in these legacy solutions. And for what they're worth, they're incredibly good. So if you're going to be parking, 9 figures or 12 figures or something like that, then you might not care about the $50 fee or the $500 fee or whatever it may be. It's somewhat irrelevant. But if you're trying to do small transactions and frequent ones, you can't. There's the other side of it as well, where there's, and you mentioned, for example, Honduras. We've got a very large community of Venezuelans in EOS so it touches upon two things. They have a marketplace. And really, EOS and cryptocurrencies address two particular issues that they were having. One is the inflation that was inherent to their local currencies. People, of course, associate cryptocurrencies with high volatility, but they don't associate them, especially the higher market cap currencies. They're not necessarily associated with 5 digits, 10,000% inflation like we saw in certain countries in the 90s and the 2000s. And so there is somewhat of that, in a way, stability to those cryptocurrencies for transaction. But in particular for this Venezuelan community and their marketplace, and they have, I believe at this point, over 700 or 800 businesses that accept EOS. It's more than just bringing in fiat, trading it for cryptocurrencies, and then, let's say, having to sell that cryptocurrency in order to pay the rent. What they're essentially doing is creating a whole new economy that is based on, in this case, EOS. And so you would, buy your gas in EOS. You would now get on your moped, which you bought on EOS. You would go to the next town and you'd buy your bread that you bought on EOS. And the person who receiving the EOS would now buy his flour to make more bread using EOS. And we're seeing this happen because of these scalable next-gen cryptocurrencies, because the marginal cost, again, of actually using the network is so incredibly low that you're able to use it for these daily type of transactions. And we do see this right now. So there are growing communities around the world that can definitely take advantage already. Whereas, let's say in the West, those are things that we don't necessarily look at or take into account because we're not subject to, currently anyways, hyperinflation. We also don't have issues with credit. We don't have issues with perhaps governance interference with our funds. Those are things that really are inherent to the blockchain and to cryptocurrencies that we're already starting to see bear fruit in certain areas of the world.
Okay, so I just want to say right now that what you just said made me really happy I scheduled this room. I'm learning a lot from you guys. I really appreciate this. What you just described in Venezuela is sort of my dream of where cryptocurrencies can go. That we can free ourselves from the tyranny of bad government currencies in a way that makes a lot of sense. So let me turn to this. I mentioned Dogecoin. I mentioned a couple others. I want to ask, EOS is special in a certain way. I think Dan mentioned that some of the cryptocurrencies are just Bitcoin clones. I've heard about Cardano, I've heard about Polka Dot, I've heard about Tether. Are any of these currencies anything other than Bitcoin clones?
All of the ones you mentioned are unique. At least I think they all. Cardano built their own blockchain tech. XRP did. Ethereum did. EOS did. So you'll see that there's kind of like these families of blockchains out there, and there's clones of Ethereum, there's clones of EOS, and there's clones of Bitcoin. But the originals tend to be the ones that have the most value.
So Cardano is one I've heard about, and my impression is Cardano might be pretty close to Ethereum in the way it's designed. Is that close to correct?
Actually, no. Cardano uses a proof of stake algorithm, which, yes, depending on how you look at it, could be considered similar to DPoS or delegated proof of stake. Delegated proof of stake is what I created for BitShares and used on Steem and then EOS. The idea is that the token holders elect people to take turns to produce blocks. And so it kind of follows a governance model whereas Ethereum and Bitcoin use proof of work, which is basically people are competing to turn electricity into computational power in search of winning the right to produce the next block. Ethereum is looking to move to something like a proof of stake, which would then be more energy efficient, but it's not there yet. So there's pretty substantial differences. The other being that Bitcoin is just a currency and it's a single currency. Ethereum is programmable, Cardano is a currency that just recently got the ability to allow people to issue other currencies, but it's not yet a smart contract platform. And EOS is a currency and smart contract platform. And I guess XRP is also, or which is Ripple. It's a ledger that's dedicated to, I guess, a fixed set of functions versus smart contracts, which would be a general set of functions. So that's a high level.
I want to dive into EOS in a minute. Could you describe a little bit more? Tell me a little bit about the two others that I have in my notes are Polka Dot and Tether. How would you describe those?
Tether is kind of a virtual token. It's not a blockchain. It's an asset that exists on multiple blockchains. It's more like a bearer bond issued by a corporation. It just happens to use the blockchain as a ledger. So it's effectively corporate debt that doesn't pay interest. And I guess maybe even legally they're not even obligated to buy it back. I haven't read the fine print on it, but the easiest analogy for Tether is it's corporate debt that's tracked on a blockchain and it actually exists on multiple blockchains. It exists on EOS, it exists on Ethereum, and so that makes Tether fundamentally different because if the dollar crashes, Tether crashes.
And then Polka Dot, what's Polka Dot?
I don't know too much about the history of Polka Dot, but maybe someone else on the panel.
Well, I guess I can touch upon it a little bit. So Polka Dot is similar to EOS in a way that they're aiming to be a smart contract platform that will have interoperability between different side chains. They call them, I believe, parachains. But the key difference is EOS has been live and functional for 2.5 years. Some of them that you've mentioned, Warren, and what Dan mentioned at the onset of this call was that they aspire to be, but they're yet there. So they don't have a live functional product. It's still very much theoretical. And I think that's the main difference. And this is one of the key aspects as to why Bitcoin is also, in a way, Bitcoin is king. You've probably heard that. It's because it's been live and functional and battle tested for over 10 years. Well, EOS is the first, let's call it, new wave or blockchain 3.0 that's actually battle tested. It's been live and running. It's no longer theoretical at this point, and that's definitely a key difference.
Okay, so let's dive into EOS because I just learned about it like this week, thanks to Mark and bringing you guys on board. So tell me what makes EOS special.
When I built EOS, it was the result of having built two special purpose blockchains, BitShares, which was a decentralized exchange, the original DeFi blockchain, the original decentralized autonomous organization, or DAC, was in BitShares, and it was also the result of the lessons from Steemit, which is the first social media platform on a blockchain. And in both of those cases, the blockchain had a set of code and rules that were fixed. They couldn't be changed on the fly without everyone having to upgrade their nodes. So about 4 years ago, I got together with Block One and said, let's take the lessons I've learned building these two powerful applications and make a platform that allows anyone to build these applications and deploy it onto a blockchain without having to invent their entire blockchain and all the other infrastructure. They can just build apps on top of an existing currency that has value, that's already plugged into the exchanges, and is permissionless. So that's what EOS is. It's a smart contract platform that leveraged the experience of those two prior platforms, which means I've figured out what was required to meet the needs of app developers. So I would say that what makes EOS unique is I consider it the most developer-friendly smart contract platform because it uses standard languages, C++, or anything else that can be compiled to WebAssembly. It uses web standards. WebAssembly is a web standard as the virtual machine that's running all the smart contracts, compared to a custom virtual machine that wasn't even designed by experts in virtual machine design, which is what Ethereum does with their EVM. And Ethereum uses like a custom language that people have to learn the new language in order to develop for Ethereum. Whereas on EOS, if you can find some C++ or C coders, and there's some other languages that are supported as well, then you can start writing smart contracts, and you're given a powerful database, you're given powerful permission systems, and you've got super low latency. It's really just it's the best programming environment for developers. And so you can build more complex applications faster on EOS than any other platform.
Aaron, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say on the flip side of that, you also have the user experience, which is ultimately what drew our team into the space. Most other blockchain projects work off of, the public key cryptography that we talked about a little bit earlier in this call. But your public key represents who you are. But within the EOS ecosystem, you actually have an account. That is an account-based system that your public and private keys basically act as a way to access the account. They kind of act as passwords. So it creates this environment where you have a more human readable name rather than just, like a 50-character long string of gibberish. And it allows you to more easily kind of manage who you are, your identity in that system, and manage your keys. Like, you can change your keys or change your password on a website. You can change your keys on the blockchain, but you're still the same account. I know one of the biggest hurdles, which there have been many advances in solving for other blockchains, is the fact that keys often aren't reusable. You have to change keys. There's always, this very complex string of random characters that you have to deal with, and these next generation blockchains are starting to do away with that to make it easier for users to start adopting.
Okay, so one question I had was, some weeks ago, Elon Musk was referring to Dogecoin and said that he didn't support it. His big criticism was that there was too much power concentrated in too few holders of Dogecoin. There's some concern about the governance of the currency being dominated by a few small interests. Is EOS have distributed governance? How does EOS address distributed governance, if that's the right term?
Sure. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to create the most decentralized systems possible. And what I realized is, whether you're a traditional proof of stake system, whether you're a proof of work system, it's always going to be controlled by Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, 80% of the assets owned by 20% of the people. And that also is, I guess, fractal in nature, which means 1% own 51%. So with delegated proof of stake, we elect 21 block producers, which each have an equal share. So at the top, you got 21 people with equal share. On Bitcoin, with proof of work, the miners, through their work, elect mining pools. Well, the top 3 pools control 51% of all blocks produced, which this problem with Pareto principle is it's everywhere in nature, it's everywhere in wealth and power distributions. And so in an attempt to claim it's decentralized, we have, until we conquer Pareto principle, some of these systems technically are controlled by fewer people than the Federal Reserve might be. And that's the one saving grace that keeps all these systems decentralized is the fact that they're public ledgers and the rules are public. And if the people in charge can't change the rules, the only thing they can do is censor you. And one of the advantages of proof of stake networks is you can spin up a fork and remove the bad actors from the network if they start misbehaving. Whereas, like Bitcoin, if the mining pools start to do something, it's not so easy to just create another proof of work chain, because all the power is in the hardware and the access to electricity.
Could you just explain what you mean by spin up a fork?
Sure. This happened with Steemit. The idea is you can copy the entire. Imagine you have a bank and the bank starts doing something nefarious and taking people's money out of their accounts and in ways contrary to what the public expects. Imagine you could just copy the database of the bank, put it in the hands of new custodians, and remove the bad actors from the equation. Now, all the people can just follow to the new database, and there's a new consensus. And in that way, the people are ultimately in charge. Now, if the database was private and you had to go through their website and their servers to access the bank's records, you can't do that. The bank starts misbehaving. There's nothing you can do to copy the user base to a new chain. And so transparency of the ledger is probably the single biggest requirement of decentralization. And the second biggest requirement is the on-chain, the consensus process by which people in the community, the token holders, get together and can make changes to the chain. Something like Bitcoin is really hard to change, which means the only way to change consensus is to sell your Bitcoin and go buy another token. And that's valuable in its own right. But not all applications are so simple. If you have a blockchain that's tracking tickets in a movie theater, you can't just clone that and create a whole new blockchain that says, oh, your ticket's now over here, because it exists in both places, but there's still only one showing and there's only one seat. So there's a need for people to reach consensus on how to change the rules of the platform they're operating on, and to do so in a way that doesn't get captured by special interests and therefore becomes prone to corruption. And that's the problem that I'm actively solving with the Eden governance proposal that we're talking about on EOS.
Great. So let me move on to my next question, which I didn't anticipate the answer was going to be this easy for you. My question that I wrote down was, can blockchain technology bring us better social media? And apparently you were working on that and I didn't know about it beforehand. I get frustrated with Twitter. I was recently banned from Facebook. I don't even know why. I didn't get notification of why. I didn't get an appeal. I don't think I've ever had much problem on Twitter, but I've seen other people have problems on Twitter. They don't seem like free speech environments, and the power is concentrated concentrated in a way that we don't have any power. Can blockchain technology bring us social media where we can't be censored so easily and there's no centralized control?
Absolutely. That's what's happened with Steemit. And it's got multiple websites that provide interfaces to the same blockchain and the same content. Your account's controlled by your keys. The blockchain is public, so if you wanted to, you could run it on your own computer and talk directly to the database without having to ask anyone to access the blockchain. So it's as censorship resistant as any blockchain, and that's incredibly powerful.
Let me just ask you really quick. Steemit is, if I want to access Steemit for social media, is it STEEMIT or is it something else? Or
yes.
Are there other websites that use the same?
Yeah, I want to put a caveat on here because there's some history to Steemit, in that Tron bought Steemit Inc. And then they attempted to change. They had an outsized portion of control, because they were a large Steem token holder, and they partnered with the exchanges and tried to change the Steem network to make it run on the Tron blockchain. The Steem community of users, this decentralized masses that were trying to use this, didn't like that, right? And so in order to protect themselves from this hostile takeover, they actually forked the network and created hive.blog. And the Hive network has all the same users most of the same users that were on Steemit, because it's the same blockchain. All the content moved over to hive.blog, and now you have a thriving ecosystem there without the bad actors from the perspective of the community. It demonstrates the power of a DPoS chain and transparency of blockchain to really protect the community's interest in the ongoing platform. And so it's not just so easy as just, I got enough money, I'm going to buy the company and then change the policies and start censoring or whatnot. You actually have to get the people's buy-in. And so I would actually recommend people check out hive.blog
It's
which yeah,
HIVE.blog.
yeah.
Okay.
And that's the actual legacy. I created Steemit. I left to do EOS, and then Steem a couple of years later sold to Steemit, the company that created Steem, the blockchain, sold to Tron, and then provided us one of the best case studies of a delegated proof of stake chain uh, acting to protect its users from, I guess, the concentration of wealth being abused.
And just really quick, how many users does Hive.blog have?
I
Ballpark.
don't know the number, but I would say 100,000.
Okay, and what are the hurdles to get? I guess my impression is there's a lot of people who are unhappy with Facebook and Twitter, and Instagram, and whatever other major social medias out there, and would like to be part of a decentralized social media network. What's the challenge? I mean, I guess there's a critical mass problem, but how can we get more people onto that platform or similar platforms so that we can get? I mean, I personally, I'm still happy on Twitter, but I get frustrated from time to time. How do we get more people to? What's the challenge for a social media network like that to attract more users?
It's a governance challenge ultimately, because all free and open platforms suffer from a certain element of abuse from the anonymous users and people attempting to manipulate any reward or incentive system you put in place to earn tokens and so forth. So Steem started off as a thriving community that was growing rapidly. We had all races and genders and ages joining the platform, and it was a fun and inspiring place to be. But because there's money and tokens involved, which drove people, and people started coming there for the wrong reasons, right? And then they tried to figure out how to manipulate the algorithms to reward themselves without any concern for the quality of the content or the experience of the people who are there for the right reason. So, in a centralized platform like Twitter, they can actually block the bad actors. But, but the power to block the bad actors is also the power to censor the good guys and to empower the government. And so there's this governance problem where how do you get a group of people to agree on how to elect people who can govern the community and moderate content in a way that is transparent and fair and free from abuse, and that doesn't put the current leaders in a situation where once you're elected, you can censor and block and maintain power and control forever. And that's the problem that I'm actively working on now. That's the problem that I explore extensively in my book, More Equal Animals. Is how do you create a true democracy that protects the right or the ability of the people to reach a new consensus and limits the ability of incumbent advantage in politicians and centralized points of control from effectively undermining the intended democratic approach, undermining instead of representing the people, it represents the special interests. That's the problem that needs to be solved, not just for decentralized social media, but for the world generally and for the libertarian utopia we all wish to achieve, is how do we make sure that our society actually represents the masses of the people instead of representing who the media and other people who control the infrastructure we all depend on.
I keep getting happier and happier that I set up this room. So thank you for another great answer. So my next question sort of relates to what Yves said earlier about Venezuela. I let me start this off with when I got Bitcoin I started using Bitcoin very early well, not very early, but maybe it was $500 price or even less than $500, and I was just doing it for some small scale transactions online, and I liked the fact that it was at least appeared to be completely anonymous. I liked the fact that the government didn't know, or at least I didn't think they knew what transactions I was doing. And something happened along the way with Bitcoin, which may have increased its value, but to me made it worse, which is it went corporate, it went bank, it went big exchanges, and all of a sudden we got this know your customer anti-money laundering regulation that to me takes away one of the great features of cryptocurrency. And the reason when I joke that I made $50,000 in Bitcoin by accident, I have Bitcoin in a wallet called Electrum, and I had created a Coinbase account just so I could easily cash out my Bitcoin, and Coinbase closed my account because I was sending Bitcoin from Electrum, and that violated some sort of KYC regulation. So I guess my question is, and I think this Venezuelan example Yves described kind of covers it, can next generation cryptocurrencies free libertarians from government regulation like know your currency and anti-money laundering stuff?
That's the entire goal. That's been my reason for every piece of technology I created. I created BitShares because I saw the exchanges, the government take Mt. Gox's reserves, right? If you have to have an exchange to buy and sell, and people want dollars, so I wanted to create a dollar stable token that was only collateralized by crypto, and that was the idea behind BitShares. And the idea was that you have a group of people that can agree that this is worth approximately $1, and then you can transact with a stable currency for people who need it, and then other people have the other volatile currency, the traditional cryptocurrency. And that relationship there can allow a community to grow where they just trade entirely in crypto, and you don't even need to interface with the banks. And that's what I'm advocating for, is that we have to build technology that makes us independent from existing infrastructure. And the more that we do that, the more freedom we will have. And in theory, the more value the currency will have. But I agree with you, Bitcoin and Ethereum and XRP and ADA, they've all gone corporate. Many of these cryptocurrencies that appear to be decentralized are controlled by their foundations or a small number of people that are the founders. And the reason they're valued so highly is because they're playing the game with the existing system instead of trying to be independent. And the more decentralized you are and the more independent, the harder it is to get some of that big money flowing into your economy. But it's a trade-off. You sell your soul back into the slavery of the system in exchange for the capital gains you're seeking in your token. So that's the challenge we face, is creating systems that don't succumb to the temptation to become dependent on the powers that be in the name of profit.
Yeah, well, no, when I look at that, I'm thinking, you get Tesla buying Bitcoin, that legitimizes Bitcoin, other big players. But to me, like, the real goal would be if we had 1 billion small players who decided we're going to work with EOS. I'm just using EOS as an example. I'm not endorsing EOS formally, although I got to say everything you've said I've liked. But let's say 1 billion relatively poor people said, let's start using EOS instead. Then it would effectively be more valuable, even though it wouldn't have big players involved. And I almost think like there's this challenge of how do you resist the big players getting involved? Is it difficult to keep them out? I mean, it's almost like there's an inherent incentive if you have a lot of, let's say, EOS, and then you find out that some big corporation wants to play. The value of your EOS is going to go up in dollar terms. That's attractive to somebody who holds EOS, right?
Yeah, it's always attractive to sell out. It's kind of like you have all these independent stores and companies, and they sell out and they get aggregated all in until Amazon controls everything, right? The exit strategy of a lot of independent entrepreneurs is to sell, and that's why we have the centralization. And when you have something like the Fed, which has unlimited printing presses, they can buy up everything. And so, we need people who won't sell out and people who will see the value of independence and see that not measuring everything entirely in terms of the value of the token, but the independence and the freedom of the token, which are somewhat more intangible and subjective. There's these other qualities that we need to look at, and it's and just going for capital gains is going to take you right back into slavery.
Is it possible to design a blockchain to make it harder for government regulation to track what's going on?
I'm actually going to have to bow out of this conversation, as fun as it's been. Thank you so much for the time here today. I think Yves and Aaron will be able to answer pretty much anything else going forward. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. You're brilliant. I love this. So, all right. So, Yves,
Yep.
Is it possible for a cryptocurrency to be designed in a way that makes it more difficult or impossible for government to get involved and impose regulation?
Well, I think EOS to a certain extent already does this, and it's just an inherent feature because of the volume of transactions that it's capable of handling. In EOS, on average, at peak, we were doing roughly, let's say, 82. I think actually no, sorry. The record that we did was around 115 million transactions in a day, and that was sustained for a couple of days. There's a lot of volume. To put that in perspective, in a single day, EOS was doing more transactions than Ethereum in a year. In a few hours, EOS was doing more transactions than Bitcoin does in a year. Legacy systems are somewhat easy to track, and we do have, I guess, companies that are already out there that offer these services to facilitate the tracking, to facilitate the onboarding. I think those will continue to exist, and the reality is, for the vast majority of people, their onboarding process gets them to go through those particular chains at the onset. So Bitcoin, for the vast majority of people, is the on-ramp into the blockchain world. And so the government, in a way, already controls those blockchains through the exchanges or through fiat on-ramps and is able to see who's who. Once you're in the ecosystem, I think this is where it gets a little bit more Wild West in a sense, because then you're able to transact more freely, and that's what I guess we have in multiple blockchains, but decentralized finance, where the incentives for people to track are simply not there, and or they're technically too challenging. So we worked with a particular company that offers these services for Bitcoin and Ethereum, and they approached us because they wanted to know whether or not we could essentially offer the same service to them, but on EOS. And the cost to be able to do so is just ridiculously high, that the incentives and the return on investment is just not worthwhile. And so we already have that in a way just by being so performant and so scalable. And again, going back to, there's a lot of these micro transactions. And so the government is really looking for, in general, I'm from Canada, so in any transaction over $10,000 is what's being tracked by FinTrack, for example. But when you have these millions and millions of micro transactions, it is much, much, much harder on a technical level, even if you wanted to be able to track and get a hold of. Plus, it's just not worthwhile. If you're typically, the regulators are going to be going after those large transactions, which can be linked to individuals and or can be linked to particular, let's say, a type of transaction. Whereas on new blockchains, that just becomes more difficult and I think less valuable to do so. So people have this inherent value to be able to transact more freely and be left to their own in a way.
Awesome. So this leads into, well, actually, I kind of wanted to ask this. So what you just described in terms of microtransactions, or at least small transactions, is that what's going on in Venezuela, where I think you said there's 800 businesses that are doing this?
Definitely. I mean, I would say, so for them, for some of their marketplace, you're buying a cola, or you're buying a hamburger, you're buying your flour for your bread, you're buying your gas or whatever. And so they obviously peg the transaction amount to an amount that, let's say, they were used to in the old world. So, you know, if gas was $5 before for a full tank, well, they've now pegged it so that the amount of EOS that you'll need to send is roughly the equivalent. Obviously, there's volatility in there, but that's how the system is able to transition somewhat fluidly. Now, eventually, I would imagine that will change, and you're no longer going to, especially in areas like that, you're likely going to be able to transact without thinking of old world fiat conversions. But in terms of microtransactions, we see a lot of this on EOS, where the smallest denomination that you can transact is 4 decimal points after the zero, and so you're able to have very, very, very small transactions that inherently are feeless in order to move. And we see a lot of these. And that brings up really interesting use cases where people, especially from a decentralized finance point of view, are capable of doing things on EOS that they're not capable of doing on a blockchain, for example, where in like Ethereum, where you have to take into account gas fees. So you're not able to do micro trades or these, high frequency trades for whatever they may be, simply because inherently the system doesn't allow it due to the technical limitations.
What is the transaction cost for EOS?
Well, there are none, in the sense that, and that's not, it's not really the whole answer, and maybe Aaron can jump in as well. But there's a new model that essentially was just deployed on EOS, where of course there are resource costs in the sense that somebody somewhere is running a computer. There's electricity, there's labor costs, but the costs are so marginally small that for the vast majority of users, they're able to transact on the network for free for the mass majority of people. And then you have people like Aaron who have created portals or I guess a means to be able to transact that take care of the transaction on your behalf. And then power users then have to, let's say, pay for fees to transact if they're doing multiple, thousands and thousands of transactions per day. But then we're going into sub-penny. So where one transaction on Ethereum at peak, let's say, can be $50, $200, depending on the complexity of the transaction. If it's simply a transfer of value, so I'm sending you, one Ether, I'm sending you one EOS, then that's kind of at the lower end of transaction costs. But if you're doing something that's complex, and then we go back to the smart contracts, where in the transaction, what I'm trying to do actually has multiple lines of code, there are multiple instructions, then the transaction costs go up significantly. And we saw that through various applications over the course of the summer, where transactions were going up to $200, $500 for one transaction. Whereas on EOS, either they're completely free, so they've been abstracted from the user. In Venezuela, I believe that the vast majority of people are transacting either for free or for fractions and fractions of a penny. So when it comes down to the operational cost that you're adding on to the user, it's negligible.
Yeah, and one of the big things with how EOS's contracts are designed is that you can actually pay for somebody else's transaction. So that's one of the things we've been deeply exploring for about a year now within Greymass is how do we use this technology of being able to cover the transaction costs for other users because they're so low, and make it a super simple experience for the end user so they can perform these microtransactions and not have to worry about fees. Within our products, we cover fees for users up to a certain point every day, and it, like Yves said, it's a fraction of a penny per transactions, and so we eat that cost as a way to drive adoption. And we also get, the way this new system works without getting into detail is when you kind of purchase in bulk, you can kind of get a little bit better of a deal. So, we're kind of bulk covering transaction costs, getting a decent deal, and let users are transacting for free because of it. And then when it finally does come to the point where users actually do have to cover the costs of their own transactions, it's, a tenth of a penny or something.
So just be clear, somewhere in the future, we expect that EOS will have a transaction cost for users, but it will be very small.
Actually, if I can add to that, Warren, so we do effectively already have a transaction cost, but as Aaron mentioned, there's the inherent ability in EOS to be able to pay for somebody else's transactions. So let's say I'm a marketplace or I'm a storefront. I can, within my own operational expenses, choose to include that as a cost and eat the cost for you so that the end user never even has to see that there is a cost. That already exists. To follow up on that, one thing that's very different with EOS than it is, let's say, with traditional proof of work systems, so like Ethereum or Bitcoin, in traditional systems, the transaction costs go to the miners. That's their bread and butter. In EOS, the transaction costs, should you ever pay them, and obviously some people do, power users, or like I said, businesses that are covering the cost on behalf of their end users. Those transaction fees go back to the token holders. So in EOS, the token holders themselves are the miners. So for example, if you have a certain amount of EOS that you're not using, you're getting dividends based on network usage proportionally to the amount of EOS that you own. So when comes the day that you indeed have to pay for a transaction cost, likely the amount of dividends that you've received for the amount of tokens that you own exceeds the amount of cost that you're going to have to bear, should you even have to bear transaction costs.
Okay, so
And that's inherently different than, let's say, Bitcoin or Ethereum, where the token holder in EOS is the miner.
okay, so I just want to. I'm about to start to open up hand raising in a minute. Before I do that, I just want to reset the room. We've been talking about next generation cryptocurrencies, in particular EOS, because Eve and Aaron and Dan, who was in the room before, are involved with EOS. We also talked about some other cryptocurrencies, after Bitcoin and Ethereum, what's coming next is the idea. This is a group I created called Libertarian Panels. If you look up at the top, you'll see Libertarian Panels US and a greenhouse. If you like this concept, click on the greenhouse and you can follow the group. And the basic idea of the group is that we have panel discussions, at least at first, and eventually open up to questions, and then we open up to like a social gathering. So with that said, I'm going to turn on hand raising.